just welcome and thank you for the interest that you've shown in this special interest group around degree apprenticeships. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah Chesney and I'm your facilitator for the webinar. I joined PebblePad recently in January as an implementation specialist, having had a long association with PebblePad. And it's nice to see so many familiar faces and feel that this group actually has already formed almost before we formally started it. I know that there's been conversations between yourselves sometimes away from PebblePad. So it's almost just really putting a formal stamp on what is a pre-existing group. And I'm really rather pleased that Dr. Alison Felce has agreed to be our first guest speaker from the QAA. Sit back, and if we remember that we're saving questions till the end, and it looks like most people can come in on the audio to ask the questions, but use the chat if you want to. Is that okay, Alison? Over to you.
Absolutely fine, yeah, no problem. I will actually, Sarah's obviously said they've got a similar approach in Scotland. I mean, they've got the same quality code, but in terms of how they do apprenticeships, it's a complete world apart from how they do it in England, because it's a completely different system. They don't have the IFA and the ESFA and all the rest of it, and it's all very much done as an organisation called Skills Development Scotland are leading on their graduate apprenticeships, but it's all very much within the HE sector rather than trying to meld with FE and a different world. So it's quite a complicated landscape across the 4 nations at the moment, but I'll mention that when I go through. Okay, we've over last 12 months we've done quite a bit of work around graduate degree apprenticeships, higher apprenticeships, and we worked with GIS when we did some quality enhancement network events in the winter. And they asked people what they found concerning about managing quality of apprenticeships. So we did some wordles, and these were, we did 3 or 4, but I haven't got the facility to combine them all, but this was sort of the most responses that came back, and the sorts of areas of concern for people. And I think without going into them in detail, I think if you look at those, you'll see there's various different things that where technology could be used and PebblePad could be used in terms of things like tracking and review, like endpoint assessment, designing things, monitoring things, working with employers. So there's all sorts of different aspects around the concerns of managing quality that can be addressed through PebblePad and you working with the SIG. As I mentioned earlier, there's 4 completely different approaches across the 4 nations. Within every nation, though, the apprenticeship is a job with training to industry standards. Employers are involved in the development of the apprenticeships, but again, in very different ways across the nations. In England, they lead the development and they lead the groups that develop the standards. In Scotland and Wales, for instance, they're involved through sector organisations, employer organisations, working with people like HEFQ and SDS in Scotland to develop the apprenticeship routes. Higher education, it's all levels in England, Wales, Northern Ireland from 4 to 7, and in 8 to 11 in Scotland. So it's anything that would normally involve higher education in the traditional sense. Okay, quality assuring with the QAA. 4 key areas that I draw your attention to, I suppose 3 really. The quality code, our current approaches document, and the characteristics statement. The quality code is in a state of moving at the moment. So we've got the old code, which is still valid until November, and then the new code comes into being in November, but it is already out there and published. Any higher education within the country comes under, UK higher education comes under the quality code. So whatever type of student you have, wherever they're studying, whether they're at a home institution, at a partner institution, on a different campus, in a different part of the world, if they're doing it through distance learning, if it's UK higher education, the quality code applies. So what we've done within the QAA is look at the relevant parts of the quality code, very much around B10, which is the working with others, but also every section of the code will apply. Designing courses, learning, teaching, assessment, supporting students, every section of the quality code will apply in apprenticeships, but in different ways to how it would apply if you've got students sat in front of you in the classroom, of course. What we did, we were asked, the Quality Assurance Agency were asked about 15 months ago now, before I've been with them since last July, so before I joined, they were asked to write a characteristic statement, but they decided that they put together a panel that's got various stakeholders involved. We've got representation of universities and further education colleges, private providers across the 4 nations, and we've got people like HEFQ, Department for Education, Institute for Apprentices and so on, are all sit on that group. And they've said it's too early, as I'm sure you know if you do anything with apprenticeships, the field's changing so much. It's too early at the moment to write a characteristic statement, but that will be coming as one of my tasks for the next 12 months, but I'll come back to that very briefly at the end. Okay, quality code, then current code and the one that's coming in November. It was published in March, so it's available on our website and the UCSEQA website if you're not familiar with it. Already said, covers all students in higher education, developed by the sector. The current code has 19 expectations. The new code has 4 with some core and common practices. So it's slimlined or slimmed down for the new version. The intention is that it's because higher education is one of the matters that have devolved to the 4 nations, to the 3 other nations. And they can do it how they want to. It's not down to Westminster to decide how Scotland, Wales and Ireland do it. And if the quality code is too restrictive, which some see it as restrictive at the moment, then it stops that sort of innovation and those differences across the sector. Currently at the moment, we've got parts A, B and C. Part A is things around the standards and frameworks. Characteristic statements come into that, subject benchmark statements, all of those I'm sure you'll be familiar with, and they all give you help, advice and guidance on how to pitch the design of the courses, making sure you've got consistency across different providers, different subjects at sort of what is a degree level, what's an honours degree and so on. 11 chapters of part B are the detail around quality assurance. Very much follows the student learning journey through, so it starts off with admissions and ends up with research degrees, postgraduate degrees and so on, and has each stage on the journey. And then part C is the information, which is very much to an extent been overtaken now by the CMI guidelines and similar, so it did need updating, but it's been quite a radical update. In terms of apprenticeships, we're very much looking at, you might be familiar with the term collaborative provision or working higher education provision with others. It is collaborative provision. I've been asked by a number of people, or the statements in there, oh, QAA see it as collaborative provision. We don't see what else it would be really, but I think in some places collaborative provision has been used as quite a narrow definition in terms of it's used as franchise arrangements. So, your award being delivered through another partner, but it is any provision that is delivered by others. So the fundamental principle that you'll see there, I'm not going to read it through for you, for chapter B10, which is managing provision with others, is that the degree awarding body has that ultimate responsibility, and that continues, slightly different wording, but that will continue in the new code. So whatever's happening in terms of what your organisation is delivering, if you're HE or FE, or if it's work-based learning that's being delivered in the partner, if it's mentoring within the partner, within the employer organisation, if there's other training providers involved, anything that contributes to the award, if there is a university award, comes under the responsibility of the degree awarding body. So all the things you'd normally deal with in terms of developing full-time courses, part-time courses, sandwich, distance learning, whatever they might be, will still apply with apprenticeships, but with added levels of complexity depending where you are in the UK. The new quality code, as I say, there's 4 expectations, 2 for standards, 2 for quality, and they're underpinned by core practices and common practices. Core practices are mandatory in England. Core practices are mandatory across the UK. The common practices aren't mandatory in England, but they underpin the review processes in Scotland and Wales, and probably will in Northern Ireland when they settle down on what they're actually going to do. Key areas to be aware of in terms of apprenticeships, I'll just flag up the 2 sections. So on the expectations for standards core principles and the expectations for quality core principles, we're looking at, when you're working in partnership, you've got to have effective arrangements in place. So it's very much that fundamental principle we looked at before. It's the degree awarding bodies responsible for ensuring the quality, whoever's delivering that bit of the course, if that makes sense to people. If I say something as I go through that really doesn't make sense, you want to pipe up and say, sorry, can you explain? Please do so. I know Sarah's said not to ask questions, but if it's a point of clarification, please ask as I'm going through. Okay, so the quality code is there. What we did, say 12 months ago, 15 months ago, last May, was produced a quality assuring higher education apprenticeships current approaches document. Nice catchy title there. And that goes through, if you're not aware of this document already and you're involved in any way with apprenticeships, I'd very much recommend that you go and look at it, because we go through very much the quality code and the key parts of it that are relevant to apprenticeships that are different. So things like, assessments, you're looking at work-based assessments, you're looking at integrating in your learning and teaching the work-based learning. You need to be thinking about different pedagogies and so on. And because of the variations within the different countries, it looks at the context across the different countries. So it will give you a basic information about things you need to think about in terms of learning and teaching, designing your programs. And then in the English context, it means this. In the Welsh context, it means that. In the Scottish context, it means the other. So it's useful for that. And as the apprenticeships field has changed quite a lot over the last 12 or 15 months, it's obviously changed significantly in England with the IFA coming into being and developing their processes and requirements. Scotland have further developed what they're doing from last year, and Wales had only just had the Hazelcom report when we published last year, so there was very little information about what was happening in Wales because they were only at the start of the process. So we've had some significant updates for the second edition, which was published last Friday. And as you'll see from that, we also have a Welsh version of it. So if you're a Welsh speaker or you want to learn a new language, there's a Welsh version there for you to use. So I say it is advice and guidance. My expectation would be, well, this document will continue to be in existence beyond the new code coming in November, but because we refer to the current code, it will be updated. So we talk about B10, for instance. Well, that's not going to exist after November. Developed by cross-sector group, as I say, represents all the countries. So I don't think there's anything in there that I've not already said to you, but there's a note of it for you, save you scribbling down the points. Things we've added into this section is the new edition, as you'll see, things about complaints and appeals, recognising prior learning. We've added a section on resources and other information, and also a section on the glossary, because there's a whole different language applies within apprenticeships and in the different countries. So it is, if you're familiar with it already, it's significantly different now. So it's worth bringing yourself up to date with the new version. If you want to find it, it's on our website, so qaa.ac.uk. If you look under the quality code and follow it through to existing code part A, we're at the bottom of the page there for you to download the document. Okay. Right, the characteristic statement I started talking about earlier on. I don't know if you're familiar with characteristic statement. We have them, for instance, for master's degrees, for foundation degrees, for research degrees, for taught master's programs and things. So it's a document that identifies the level at which a program is being delivered, important features about the program and so on, to make sure that in designing new courses across the country, they all follow a similar format. Not and I don't mean down to the sort of day-to-day delivery, but in terms of the level of delivery, linking with qualifications frameworks, subject benchmark statements, and so on. And something within an apprenticeship's characteristic statement would I suggest be very much around the integration of the work and the learning, that there should be no sort of being taught on one side and doing your work on the other side. They should be sort of a seamless interaction between them. And that, for me, I think would be a key feature of the characteristic statement. That's the sort of thing that would be in there. But again, we've got to write it for various different levels, for whether they have or haven't got a formal qualification in them, and for the different countries. So there's quite a bit of work going into that, but that should be out in about 12 months' time. But there'll be more news on that as we go forward. Okay, it's quick enough. I thought it was going to be there actually. That's a very brief overview of what's in the quality code. I'm obviously happy to answer any questions about it. There's all sorts of other help and requirements out there. So if you're working in England, the Education Skills Funding Agency publish funding and performance management rules. So it's not just enough to make sure that anything you're doing to support your academics and other areas, admissions and student enabling centres or whatever, you've got to make sure that everything fits in with funding and performance management requirements. And it might be worthwhile having at least an overview of what's in that document to make sure that you're not going against any of those rules. The Institute for Apprenticeships, set up last year, they lead the development of new apprenticeship standards in England. So the ESFA and the IFA are only in England, they don't apply in the other countries. They've updated their processes recently, but they manage the employer groups, the trailblazer groups that design the individual apprenticeship standards. And there's one there, the Chartered Manager degree, which was a fairly common one across the country. And they set out what needs to be in the standard and what needs to be in an assessment plan. I would say that they're akin to subject benchmark statements, and then anything, if you're familiar with working with PSRBs, they can be quite curriculum specific or outcomes driven, but meeting the requirements of Chartered Institute Building or the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors or the NMC, whoever it might be, they will have criteria that you have to meet. For apprenticeships, that's the same thing. There's a standard and an assessment plan that has to be met. Other areas that will be useful, there's this one here, the Future Apprenticeships Toolkit. It's very much written for FE colleges and private providers who would have delivered apprenticeship frameworks in the past, and the few universities who did get involved. And it's about moving from frameworks into standard. There's all sorts of useful hints and tips and templates and things in there, case studies and things that, again, you might find useful to get ideas from, things you could look at in terms of developing technology to meet some of the requirements. You might get some advice there. UVAC, Universities Vocational Awards Council, they were commissioned and had some funding from HEFKey last year under the Degree Apprenticeship Development Fund. So they do a lot of work supporting universities and other HE providers moving into higher and degree apprenticeships. Have a look at their website. There's lots of useful information on there that, again, you can may get ideas that you could then develop for your practice. And then another group, the Association of Colleges, they're developing some guidance at the moment around subcontractors in apprenticeships. So they may be useful information. That should be coming out in the autumn. I think it's about the penultimate draft format at the moment. And that's a very, very quick overview. I've tried to sort of cram quite a lot into that. So please, I'll stop gabbing away and let you a chance to ask questions.
Wow, that was not just a complex overview. Well, you know, some quite not complex, but well, making quite a complex situation quite simple and straightforward, and sending us to resources that can really help us within 20 minutes, bang on time. Alison, I think you deserve a round of applause. I've typed in the link there into the chat. I'm hoping that's the right one. Do you want to just?
I can't see the chat. I've only got my screen up.
Okay, I think if you can exit full screen, you might find that the chat should come up. But in the, I'm fairly certain it is. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask Alison while we've got her? Because, as I say, she's on that annual leave and has kindly agreed to do this session for us. So she's not staying for the whole session. I think for me, the most useful thing was things like the additional resources that you pointed us to at the end, and the development of technology to meet requirements, particularly for this group. Does everyone feel confident that they now know where to go for other, if there aren't any questions, does everyone feel confident that they know where to go for this sort of foundation? When I use foundation, I mean like literally the building blocks of, Alison referred to designing degree apprenticeship programs, and feel that there's certainly a substantial range of resources out there, and just come in on the audio and say whether you've got further questions or whether that's great and you now know that you've got a good leaping off point.
I mean, was it useful to people? Did it tell you anything you didn't know, or just reinforce what you already know?
You're getting some feed through on the chat there. Good info from Andy Birch. Yeah. Okay. And from Peter, no further questions, and he's aware of most of the documents. Yeah. I think you probably find there's quite a range there, because if you, I certainly, I'll be honest with you, I coming at it from more of a technology point of view, I wasn't, when I first heard you talk at the Sheffield Hallam conference, I wasn't really aware of those documents. So it was good that you highlighted those. Okay, good. Great, well that's nice of Emma to be, like me, not fully aware of them. Good to know of the resources. Okay. Good. Well, Alison, thank you very, very much. Really useful and a good starting point. And yes, lots of reading for us to go away and do. You put your email up there. Are you happy for people to contact you when you?
Yes, yes, no problem. If anything comes through the QAA, it comes to me. So if you want to send it direct to me or go by the. I mean, every organisation will have a QAA liaison person, a quality specialist. But I don't have a problem with you coming through to me. You can ask your local person if you have contact with them, your liaison person, but tends to be, if it's apprenticeships, comes via me. But it's obviously a new field. People are developing. Some people have been doing it for a little bit longer. I think there's 100 and I think the last look there's 100 odd, just over 100 organisation HEI providers on the register for apprenticeship training providers. So that's the majority of providers now on it. So, you know, chances are somewhere in most of your organisations, I suppose the fact you've joined this group is people are looking at it, and things are being developed as we speak. And on the whole, people are happy to share what they do. You know, there's interesting developments around, for instance, with Sheffield Hallam and Derby, around sort of frameworks for developing apprenticeships. So there's some consistency across the organisation, but also it supports the curriculum approval teams, design and approval teams, in making sure that they develop apprenticeships that are fit for purpose and meet the requirements of the, in England, of the IFA and everybody else. So you know, if you're doing things and you want to know, just ask. And mostly there'll be somebody who's done it or tried it, and they're happy to share what they do.
Okay, that's good to know, Alison, because I do know from talking to people, anecdotal evidence that the curriculum approval teams have sometimes been a little bit, how can I put it? They've got very established routes into approving programs, and the degree apprenticeships have provided challenges to those established approaches. Would you say that was fair?
The big thing is the integration of the work-based learning and the sort of the expectation by some that you know, one delivers, the university delivers the academic part of it, the employer delivers the training part of it, and somehow these two things are sort of going along and occasionally bump into each other as you know, your academic and your vocational, and naturally they need to be fully integrated so that, you know, the one feeds the other and vice versa. And I think the other thing, one organisation introduced the Chartered Manager degree apprenticeship, having just reviewed their business management degree. So they've revised and updated the business management degrees and wanted to use that as a basis for the Chartered Manager degree. So they spent a lot of time tweaking this and changing that a bit and changing the other. And the person responsible at the end of the day said their advice would be start from scratch, because trying to change something that's already there, it's a lot better to look at the apprenticeship standard and the plan, not throw away what you've got, but, you know, don't try and shoehorn something to fit. Look at what it is you need and then see what you've got that you can use, rather than use this program to fit the apprenticeship, if that makes sense. So it's just looking at it a little bit differently.
Yeah, I think that's really sound advice, and I'm probably thinking that most of the people here would actually have had experience of that with working from paper-based documents and turning them into a pebble pad document. It's kind of a similar thing, isn't it? It challenges a lot of things, and then when you transition things, you're better off starting from scratch and having a really fresh, dynamic approach. It's interesting, but that's similar advice. Many thanks. A round of applause. Okay.
Right. Thanks very much, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.